this is Pretty from It's a Pretty World. Today I am doing a card set for men using this brilliant Baubles Festive Poinsettia stamp set and dies. These are called the fine alphabet dies, and the Peaceful Wreath stamp and dies. Usually I'm basically going to use the die and the sentiments from these stamps. The only main stamp I'm using is the brilliant Baubles set. Now I'm making a bunch of cards, 6 cards for men, and this is for the Altenew Academy's final challenge, which was to make men's card set. So I'm starting off to make a galaxy sky for my background. I feel that is quite a an easy and safe bet when it comes to making men card. It's galaxy sky, it's very gender neutral, and so yeah. Now in hindsight, maybe I wouldn't have chosen that pink haze color there, but you know, I just decided to go with it, and I kind of like the end result of the entire painting. So I started off with Tim Holt's watercolor paper and the Altenew's watercolor pan set for the painting itself, and I used very deep purples and like a deep pinkish shade of watercolor, and I wet the watercolor paper first with my spritzer, and then I started layering the color. Now this, what you're seeing right now, is at least 3 or 4 layers later, and I kept doing this multiple times until I was totally satisfied, because usually what happens with watercolor is that when they dry, they do tend to fade back, so you don't really get that intensity. Even though you're using really bright deep colors, you don't get that intensity that you want unless you don't do it multiple times. Now again, I have multiple rays of pink coming from all over the place, and the reason is I started this painting on a pretty large piece of paper. So I think it was a 5.5 by 8.5 cardstock, and I knew I am going to cut this eventually down, and I knew the rays would look better once I cut it down. So here again, I am continuing to do the same thing, layering color upon color, making sure that I'm layering the same color over the initial color, because I don't want to lose those color variations that I have, because it's very easy to lose the color if you add upon it. So that's the reason. And then I took this piece of bubble wrap that I had lying around, and I diluted some gouache and I applied it onto it, and I tapped that all over the surface, and that was just to add splatter, so that I had a controlled splatter. And what I did was I also added directly, I pressed it down, and that caused those bubbles, like the shape of bubbles, onto my cardstock, because when I cut it down, you'll eventually see those make it look like a really nice bouquet effect in the background, and that's what I really wanted. So I kept adding. I wanted a little more intensity in the white color, because again, as I was watering down the gouache pretty much, so it wasn't giving me that intensity that I wanted. So I kept repeating that, and once I was done with that, I heat set it, and I took a paintbrush and I took more gouache paint, not watered down as much, and I splattered. I went to town splattering that piece, and that's what ended that piece. So that's how pretty much I made a galaxy sky, and I really liked it. I also wanted to do the same thing with some distress inks and distress oxide inks. So for distress inks, I used Picked Raspberry, Mermaid Lagoon, Blueprint Sketch, Dusty Concord, Wilted Violet, and Hickory Smoke. And I started off ink blending on a Bristol Smooth white cardstock, and I really love this paper for ink blending because it does blend pretty well. Now obviously here it looks quite splotchy, and that was the reason. It was purposely making it look splotchy because I wanted it to have that variation of the clouds in the galaxy, and I didn't want everything to be smooth and I didn't want it to be super smooth. So that was the reason why I didn't care about blending it very smoothly, and I wanted it to keep splotchy. So I did the same thing. I started layering the colors, the pink and the blues and the purples, and eventually the black all over. And you can see it's less effort when you use distress markers or distress inks or distress oxide inks, is because you don't have to do as much layering as you would otherwise do. And then I did the same thing with the bubble wrap, but this time I added just plain water because I knew water was enough for it to do the effect that I wanted. I didn't really need to add paint. And then I added gouache splatter using my paintbrush, and you can see it on a distress blended paper much more. The bouquet, the little circular dots on the back, and the bouquet, and there you go, see the difference between the distress oxide and the distress and the watercolor paper. And then what I did was I took this sparkling stars sequins. I don't know if it's a sequins or what we call it, I really don't know, but it's just really tiny stars, and they're so beautiful. And I added it all over this distress ink, not distress ink, distress ink background, just to add a little bit of sparkle, and I really loved it. It just made that night sky pop. And what I did is I created a sketch for the 5 cards I wanted to make. I always create sketches for my cards, but it's always easy to visualize it. And then I wrote down what are the 3 things that I want to keep in mind. I wanted it to be a guy card. I wanted to add some glitter and shine without making it over the top, and wanted to use die cutting, because these were the 3 things that I learned in the Altenew Academy classes, and I wanted to use them. And then as you see there, I die cut that big panel, not die cut, I cut the panel into half. And that's the first card I'll be making. So the first card, I took that distress ink background where I added the stars onto the image, and I took a die cut bauble. This is from the Brilliant Bauble set from Altenew, and I just die cut the largest bauble to add to this particular panel. But what I wanted the bauble to be hanging from a branch of pine leaves, but pine branches. I always have that problem. I don't know if it's pine leaves, pine needles, pine branches, anyway, from pine branches. And because it's a night sky, I wanted it to have a silhouette effect, and I only wanted the bubble to shine. So I took a black artisan pen, and I just drew in some pine branches, very scarcely, not too much, just a little bit, just to show that there is some pine branch. And you can see the bouquet effect in the back behind the bubble, and the shiny stars. It's just beautiful. And then I also added the top of the bubble and a gold bow right on top, and I kept it really simple. And for the sentiment, I die cut a peace sentiment from the Peaceful Wreath stamp and die set. I die cut it on a gold foil paper, and then I added another sentiment, an additional sentiment on top of it on a black cardstock with white embossing. So it read peace to you. These are all the stamps that I pre-selected, or the sentiments that I pre-selected for the stamps. So it's read peace and goodwill. And then I mounted this entire card onto a side folding white cardstock, and then that finished the first card, number 1, and it turned out so beautiful, my friends. And the second card, what I did is I took a bunch of baubles from the same Brilliant Bauble stamp set from Altenew, and I placed them onto my cardstock, not in the center, but a little skewed to the right, and I used variations, like different shapes, and then I die cut them on a white cardstock, and then I backed this entire panel onto a galaxy background, a watercolor background, using foam tapes, and that's how. And then I took one of the positive baubles, or before that, I think I decided to stamp the sentiment, which ideally I should have done it even before adding it onto the galaxy background. Here you go. Now I double popped this particular bauble, which is the positive of that bauble. So I just took I'm just erasing, getting rid of some ink marks using my eraser, my electric eraser. It is an amazing thing. thanks to Jennifer McGuire who suggested that. Anyway, so what I did is I took this particular panel, this bubble, and I double foam mounted it because I wanted it to pop out of that negative space, and then I adhered it in its coordinating, what do you call it, coordinating die. What is that called? Die hole? Coordinating die hole? I don't know. Die cut, and then I added the same bow right on top of it too, and then this card was done. And I think I added it to a side folding cardstock to complete the card, and I really loved how this card turned out too. Now for my third card, I took a bunch of letters from fine alphabet dies, which is also from Altenew, and I cut down the words to create joy, love, and peace on white cardstock. And I also cut some baubles using that galaxy sheet of paper that I showed you earlier. And what I wanted to do was to spell joy, love, and peace. So in place of the letters O for joy, O for love, and A for peace, I decided to use the baubles. And I think even though they don't represent the letters completely, except for the O and the joy, it kind of conveys the message that that's what it is, because in your mind you know the spelling of those two words, and then you assume that that's how it is, and it just conveys it enough. And that's the reason I know those bubbles don't look anything like the letters, but that was a suggestion was enough to say that's what those words meant. So what I did was I put those letters down to create the word, and I drew a line, a straight line. So I made sure the starting and the ending of each letter, so that when I'm adhering it, I don't go wonky, because I am known to be wonky with things. I do not have a straight hand, guys. Anyway, and then I did the same thing, added the gold embossed bows right on top of these baubles as well. I didn't want to add too much bling to it, too much shine to it, but I just wanted to add a little bit of shine, just to give it that elegant touch, just to give it enough oomph, to make it look like a beautiful Christmassy card. And also keeping in mind, in the back of my mind, I had this thought that yes, it's for a guy, and I don't want it to be over the top shiny and sparkly and glittery. Not that guys don't like it. My husband loves glitter and shine. Maybe it's because of me, I'm rubbing on him, but just to keep it a little bit more simpler. And then I did the same thing. I cut the same words, joy, love, and peace, onto another white cardstock. So that card was done. And then for this next card, this I think is the third card, is it? I did the same thing, but instead of using the positive of the words, I used the letters, I used the negative. So I took the negative panel where I cut the letters, and I put it on top of a galaxy background. So the galaxy is peeking through the joy, love, and peace, and I kept the ornaments white instead of galaxy. And then I added 2 sentiments on top of them, and I cut them in an angle. And I think the sentiments is from Festive, Poinsettia, and it's called wishing you this holiday season joy, love, peace. So that completed that card. And then for the next card, I did not want to lay any I wanted it to be a single layer, so I cut 3 bubbles of the same design, or the same shape rather, and I wanted to put them in a line on my cardstock, but I wanted to keep the cardstock closed, so I just put a tape in there so it didn't open up on me when I was doing this, because this was a 1-layer card. So in my initially I just added the first thing I did was I positioned my my baubles to know where it was, and then I stamped my sentiment right underneath that, and then I adhered the baubles using adhered the baubles using foam tape in a line. So just above the sentiment, just 3 galaxy baubles, and then I added the same gold bows. Again, I wanted all the cards to have the same elements, the same colors. So I did, because it's a card set, I didn't want them to be all over the place and too many designs and design elements, but just keeping them very cohesive, very similar, makes the set look makes a set look like a set. So that makes sense anyways. Anyway, so that ended the 5th card. Now for the 6th card, what I did it a little differently. I cut up two large baubles on a masking paper, and I put that masking paper right onto the front of my cardstock, and that the paper that I cut out was exactly the size of the front of my cardstock. And again, this is a single layer card. And then I started ink blending on the negative portion. So I started ink blending the cutout, what do you call, the bauble, and then I splattered some white gouache onto that blended place. And then when I removed it, this is what was left, and it looks so beautiful. The colors were so pretty. I just loved it. And then I put that tape there because I didn't want the tape to move on me when I was going to do the next step. So my next step was to add strings. Now the set does come with strings, but it has a dotted element to it, and I didn't want any dotted element. I wanted it to be very simple straight string. So I just drew in with a light pencil, and then I drew in with a black pen. I always do that because I never get my lines straight, so I want to be sure that the lines are straight. So I did it with the pencil first, and then with the pen later. And then after I was done, I added the top and the bauble top and the bow, and then I added the sentiment directly, overlapping the second bauble at the bottom a little bit, so it looked like it was a part of that scene that I created. And the sentiment is from the Peacefiul Wreath stamp set, and they're beautiful sentiments in it. And that completed the 6th card. So here are all the 6 cards that I created. You can take a look at them, and I do have images of all of these cards on my blog as well, which is www.itsaprettyworld if you need more. Now it was time for packaging. So I had this old box from an older stamp set that I bought. Usually I keep my stamps in a sleeve to save space, so I had taken out all these boxes and kept away, and then I just mounted one of the Galaxy stamps on top of a white cardstock, and I inserted it into that clean box that I created, and I filled it up with my cards, and I sealed it with that handmade by stamp. And then I also added that sentiment strip right on top of the clear box. I obviously removed I obviously cleaned the box very well before I started doing all this. And then I added 2 jingle bells to tie in that gold element from my card, and I left it as is, and I did not add anything more to this. I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible, and and also relate the story, that what's inside it is all galaxy, that keeping the theme going. And that ended the card. I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a thumbs up if you like it, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.